The thunderous crack of the heavens was nothing compared to the anguished scream that tore from Vivienne James's throat as she watched the raging waters snatch her baby from her arms. The river swollen beyond recognition by 3 days of relentless spring rainfall. It was May of 1875, and what had begun as a simple journey to her sister's homestead just outside of Copper Creek, Colorado, had turned into a nightmare when the waters rose with frightening speed, overturning her wagon and separating her from her 6-month-old daughter Emma. Vivienne shrieked, stumbling through the rushing water that was already at her waist, her sodden skirts weighing her down as she fought against the current. Her fingers had just brushed against the edge of the wicker basket where Emma floated, the baby's terrified wails cutting through the roar of the flood, when the current yanked it beyond her reach. Vivienne lurched forward, losing her footing on the slippery riverbed. Water filled her nose and mouth as she went under, her lungs burning as she struggled back to the surface, coughing and sputtering. "Help!" she screamed, though there was no one to hear her on this desolate stretch of trail. The nearest town was still miles away, and the road had been empty when the flash flood hit. Her eyes never left the basket that was swiftly being carried downstream, her baby's cries growing fainter. Please, God, no. She hadn't seen the rider approaching from the west, hadn't noticed the tall man on the chestnut stallion until he was dismounting at the river's edge, tossing aside his hat and leather vest with determined movements. "Hold on, madam," came the deep, commanding voice. Vivienne whirled around to see a broad-shouldered man with a shock of dark hair plunging into the churning waters without hesitation. "I'll get your little one." Weston Farley had been tracking a herd of mustangs for the better part of a week when the rains came. He'd sought shelter in an abandoned trapper's cabin and was making his way back to Copper Creek when he heard the woman's desperate cries. The sight of the baby floating downstream in a basket had sent ice through his veins, and he'd reacted on pure instinct. The current was stronger than he'd anticipated, nearly knocking him off his feet as soon as he waded in. But Weston was a powerful swimmer, one of the few cowboys who didn't fear water, having grown up near the Mississippi. He dove forward, powerful strokes carrying him through the murky waters, keeping his eyes fixed on the wicker basket that bobbed dangerously ahead of him. Vivienne watched in terrified fascination as the stranger cut through the water with surprising grace for such a large man. She struggled toward the shore, knowing she would be of no help to her baby if she drowned herself, but unwilling to lose sight of Emma or her would-be rescuer. Weston could hear the baby's cries growing louder as he closed the distance. The basket dipped precariously, water beginning to seep into its edges. He redoubled his efforts, lungs burning, muscles straining against the force of the flood. "Almost there, little one," he gasped, reaching out as his fingers brushed the edge of the basket. The first attempt slipped past, but on the second try his hand closed around the handle. "Gotcha!" The basket was heavier than expected, waterlogged and sinking fast. Weston pulled it close to his chest, turning onto his back to keep the baby above water. The infant's face was red with crying, her tiny fists waving in distress, but she was alive. "I've got you now," he soothed, though his words were mostly lost in the roar of the waters. He kicked hard, trying to angle toward the shore, but the current was carrying them farther downstream. A fallen tree loomed ahead, its branches creating a dangerous web of obstacles. With the baby clutched to his chest, Weston had limited mobility, but he managed to brace himself as they crashed into the barrier. Pain lanced through his shoulder as they hit, but he held firm, using the tree to stabilize himself against the current. Slowly, painfully, he worked his way along the trunk toward the shore, the baby's cries growing quieter, concerning him deeply. Vivienne had been running along the riverbank, tripping over rocks and fallen branches in her haste to keep up with the current carrying her child away. When she saw the stranger catch hold of the basket, her heart leaped with hope, only to plummet again as they disappeared momentarily from view. She rounded a bend in the river to find the man struggling toward shore, using a fallen tree as an anchor. "Hold on," she called, wading into the shallower water near the bank, extending her arms as far as she dared. "Please, just a little farther." Weston's eyes locked with hers, a woman with wild copper hair and the most determined expression he'd ever seen. He nodded grimly and pushed off from the tree with his legs, making one final desperate lunge toward her outstretched hands. Their fingers touched, slipped, then caught hold. With a strength born of pure maternal desperation, Vivienne hauled backward, helping to pull the large man and her precious cargo toward safety. As soon as his feet found purchase on the riverbed, Weston straightened, lifting the basket high above the water. "She's breathing," he assured Vivienne as they stumbled onto dry ground, collapsing onto their knees in the mud. "She's cold, but she's breathing." Vivienne's hands trembled as she reached for her daughter, gathering the soaked infant against her chest. Emma's eyes were closed, her tiny body shivering violently, but at her mother's touch, she whimpered softly. "Emma, my sweet girl," Vivienne sobbed, pressing kisses to the baby's cold forehead. "You're safe now. You're safe." She looked up at the man who had risked his life without a second thought. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved her. You saved my baby." Weston, dripping and exhausted, managed a tired smile. "No thanks needed, madam. Any decent man would have done the same." He winced as he rolled his injured shoulder. "Name's Weston Farley. I've got a camp not far from here. We should get you both warm and dry before nightfall." "Vivienne James," she replied, her voice quavering with emotion and cold. "And this is Emma. My wagon's overturned back there with all our belongings." Weston nodded, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "We'll worry about your things once you're both safe. My horse is tethered just up that ridge. Can you walk?" Vivienne nodded, clutching Emma tightly as she accepted his help. Her legs were unsteady, her entire body beginning to shake with the aftermath of terror and the chill of her wet clothing. "I can manage." The walk to his horse was slow, with Vivienne stopping occasionally to check on Emma, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. Weston kept a respectful distance, but stayed close enough to offer support when Vivienne's steps faltered. His horse, a sturdy chestnut named Copper, was waiting patiently where he'd left him. Weston helped Vivienne onto the saddle first, carefully handing Emma up to her, then mounted behind them. The closeness was improper by any social standard, but survival trumped propriety in the wilderness. "Hold tight," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. "It's about 20 minutes to my camp. There's a lean-to and a fire pit, and my gear should be dry." Vivienne nodded, too exhausted and grateful to feel uncomfortable with their proximity. She leaned back slightly against his solid chest, taking comfort in his steady strength as they set off through the thinning rain. Weston's camp was simple but well situated beneath an overhang of rock that had kept his bedroll and supplies mostly dry. He worked quickly to build up the fire while Vivienne tended to Emma, stripping off the baby's wet clothes and wrapping her in one of Weston's clean shirts, which swallowed the tiny form. "Here," Weston said, offering Vivienne his spare clothing, a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers that would be comically large on her slender frame. "You need to get out of those wet things before you catch your death. I'll turn my back." Vivienne hesitated only briefly before accepting the dry clothes. "Thank you. For everything." True to his word, Weston kept his back turned, busying himself with setting up a makeshift clothesline near the fire to dry their wet garments. Vivienne changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs of the borrowed clothing, feeling instantly warmer. "I'm decent," she said softly, and Weston turned back to her, his expression softening at the sight of her swimming in his clothes, her long copper hair beginning to dry in wild waves around her face. She was, he realized with a start, strikingly beautiful, even in her bedraggled state. "I have some jerky and beans," he offered, turning away to hide the flush that had crept into his cheeks. "Nothing fancy, but it'll warm you up." They ate in companionable silence, both watching Emma, who slept peacefully now, wrapped in Weston's bedroll near the fire. As the immediate crisis passed, Vivienne found herself studying her rescuer more carefully. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 to her 24 years, with intelligent gray eyes and a strong jawline softened by the beginning of a dark beard. His hands were calloused but gentle as he tended the fire, and there was a quietness to him that spoke of a man comfortable with solitude. "You mentioned you were tracking mustangs. Vivienne asked, breaking the silence. Weston nodded. I break horses for the Double R Ranch outside of Copper Creek. Owner lets me keep a percentage of what I bring in. Was on the trail of a particularly fine black stallion when the rains hit. He glanced at her curiously. What brings you out this way alone with a little one? Vivienne's expression clouded. My husband Thomas passed last winter. Pneumonia. We had a small farm near Denver, but I couldn't manage it alone, not with Emma still nursing. My sister Martha has a place near Copper Creek with her husband. They offered me a home at least until I can decide what comes next. I'm sorry for your loss, Weston said quietly. It's a hard country for a woman alone. Vivienne's chin lifted slightly, a flash of defiance in her green eyes. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Farley. I've had to be. A small smile touched his lips. I don't doubt that for a moment, Mrs. James. Not after seeing you chase down that river like you did. The conversation flowed more easily after that, the shared ordeal creating a strange intimacy between these two strangers. As night fell fully, Weston insisted that Vivienne take the bedroll with Emma while he made do with his saddle and blanket a respectable distance away. I'll ride into town tomorrow, see about getting your wagon recovered, he said as they settled in for the night. With luck, some of your belongings might be salvageable. You've already done more than enough, Vivienne protested, but Weston waved her objection away. Wouldn't be right to leave a lady and her child stranded, he said simply. Besides, I was heading back to town anyway. Vivienne watched him through the flickering firelight as he arranged his makeshift bed. Why did you do it? She asked suddenly. Jump into the river like that. You could have drowned. Weston was quiet for a long moment, his face shadowed. My younger sister drowned when I was 15, he said finally, his voice low. I was supposed to be watching her while she played by the creek behind our farm. I got distracted, and by the time I realized she'd fallen in, it was too late. He looked up, meeting Vivienne's gaze across the fire. I couldn't save her, but I could try to save your little one. Tears welled in Vivienne's eyes at the raw pain still evident in his voice. I'm so sorry about your sister. But thank you for using that pain to do something so brave. I'll never be able to repay you. No debt exists between us, Mrs. James, Weston replied softly. Get some rest now. Tomorrow will be a long day. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having spent itself overnight. Weston was already up, coffee brewing over a fresh fire when Vivienne awoke. Emma was fussing softly, hungry after her ordeal. Morning, Weston greeted, keeping his eyes respectfully averted as Vivienne adjusted her borrowed shirt to feed Emma. Rivers dropped considerably. Should be able to get to your wagon without much trouble. They set out after a simple breakfast, Vivienne once again riding behind Weston with Emma secured in a sling fashioned from one of his spare bandanas. The landscape had been transformed by the flood, trees uprooted and new channels carved into the earth, but Vivienne was able to direct them back to where her wagon had overturned. The sight was disheartening. The wagon lay on its side, half submerged in mud, much of its contents scattered downstream. Weston dismounted and helped Vivienne down, then began the painstaking work of salvaging what he could. To Vivienne's relief, her trunk of clothing had remained latched and somewhat water-resistant, meaning she and Emma would at least have dry clothes. A few cooking implements were recovered, along with a sodden family Bible and a small wooden box containing her wedding ring and a locket with a portrait of Thomas. The wagon's axle is broken, Weston said after a thorough inspection. Even if I could right it, it wouldn't be safe to travel in. We'll need to head into town, see about repairs or a replacement. Vivienne's face fell. I don't have much money, Mr. Farley. What I had was meant to help my sister's family through until harvest. Weston considered her predicament. Copper Creek's about half a day's ride from here. My employer, Mr. Richardson at the Double R, is a fair man. Might be he could use an extra hand around the ranch house. His wife's been ailing and they've no children to help with the chores. Hope flickered in Vivienne's eyes. I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, sew whatever's needed. Then that's what we'll do, Weston decided. We'll pack what we can carry and make for the Double R, if that suits you, Mrs. James. Please call me Vivienne, she said, offering him a genuine smile for the first time since they'd met. After all we've been through, formality seems a bit absurd. Weston's stern features softened. Vivienne it is, then, and I'm Weston to my friends. Are we friends, then? She asked, a teasing note entering her voice despite their circumstances. I'd like to think so, he replied seriously. Though it's not every day I make a friend by fishing them out of a river. The journey to the Double R Ranch took longer than expected, with frequent stops to tend to Emma and to rest Copper, who was carrying a heavier load than usual. They arrived as the sun was beginning to set, the sprawling ranch house and outbuildings a welcome sight after their trials. Frank Richardson, a barrel-chested man in his 60s with a shock of white hair, met them in the yard, his bushy eyebrows rising at the sight of Weston returning with a woman and baby in tow. "This is unexpected, Farley," he remarked dryly. "Don't recall sending you out to bring back strays." "Mr. Richardson, this is Mrs. Vivienne James and her daughter Emma," Weston explained, helping Vivienne dismount. "They were caught in the flood yesterday, lost their wagon and most of their belongings. I thought perhaps Mrs. Richardson might appreciate some help around the house, what with her health being what it is." Frank's weathered face softened as he took in Vivienne's still damp appearance and the sleeping infant. "Clara's been saying she could use another pair of hands," he admitted. "And we've got the old foreman's cabin sitting empty since Peterson moved on. Nothing fancy, but it's got a roof and a stove." "I'm very grateful, Mr. Richardson," Vivienne said earnestly. "I won't be a burden, I promise." "Any friend of Farley's is welcome here," Frank replied, gesturing toward the main house. "Come on in and meet the missus. She'll be glad for the company, especially with a little one about." Clara Richardson, a thin woman with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair, took to Vivienne and Emma immediately. Within hours, Vivienne had been installed in the small but sturdy cabin near the main house, with promises of proper furnishings to be brought over in the morning. "It's just temporary," Vivienne assured Weston as he helped her settle in that evening. "Just until I can earn enough to continue on to my sister's place." Weston, who had been stacking firewood beside the cabin's small stove, paused. "Of course," he said, though something in his tone suggested disappointment, "your sister will be worried about you." "I don't even know if she knows I was coming," Vivienne admitted. "My last letter might not have reached her yet. Thomas's passing was sudden. Everything after has been a blur of decisions made in grief." Weston nodded in understanding. "Grief has a way of pushing us forward before we're ready," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's good to pause, catch your breath before the next step." Their eyes met across the small room, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had both known loss and were still finding their way through it. "I should let you rest," Weston said, breaking the moment. "It's been a long day. Will I see you tomorrow?" Vivienne asked, surprising herself with how much she wanted the answer to be yes. Weston smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "I live in the bunkhouse just over that rise. I'm not going anywhere, Vivienne." The days at the Double R fell into a rhythm. Vivienne quickly proved her worth, assisting Clara with the household duties and winning over the ranch hands with her excellent cooking. Emma became the darling of the ranch, passed from one rough cowboy to another during mealtimes, each man competing to make the baby laugh. But it was Weston to whom Emma reached out most eagerly, and Weston who stopped by the cabin each evening to check on them, often bringing small gifts: a carved wooden rattle for Emma, wildflowers for Vivienne, a rocking chair he'd repaired and refinished for long evenings on the porch. "You don't have to keep doing this," Vivienne said one evening in late June as they sat on that porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Emma was asleep inside, and the air was sweet with the scent of summer. "Doing what?" Weston asked, genuinely puzzled. "Taking care of us," Vivienne clarified. "You saved us. Your debt, if there ever was one, is paid 100 times over." Weston's expression grew serious. "Is that what you think this is, a debt being repaid?" Vivienne looked away, suddenly uncertain. "I don't know what this is," she admitted softly. "I know that I've been a widow less than 6 months. I know that I came here intending to start a new life with my sister's family. And I know that every day it gets harder to imagine leaving this place." She hesitated. "Leaving you." Weston was silent for so long that Vivienne feared she'd overstepped, revealed too much of her confused heart. But when she finally gathered the courage to look at him, his gray eyes were bright with emotion. "I've never been good with words," he said slowly. "Always been more comfortable with horses than people, but these past weeks, having you and Emma here," he took a deep breath. "It's like finding something I didn't know was missing." Vivienne's heart quickened. "Weston, I'm not asking for anything," he continued hurriedly. "It's too soon, I know that. You're still grieving Thomas, and that's right and proper. I just wanted you to know that my reasons for being here, for helping you, they aren't about debt or obligation. They're about choice. My choice to be near you if you'll allow it." Tears pricked at Vivienne's eyes, not of sadness but of a complicated joy. "I loved Thomas," she said softly. "Part of me always will, but I'm beginning to understand that the heart has room for more than one love in a lifetime." Weston reached across the space between their chairs, his calloused hand covering hers gently. "There's no rush," he said. "We have time." And they did take time. Through the heat of summer and into the golden days of fall, their friendship deepened, growing naturally into something more. Weston became Emma's devoted champion, teaching her to clap her hands and crawl, later to take her first tentative steps across the cabin floor. Vivienne wrote to her sister, explaining her change in plans and promising a visit when winter passed. Martha's reply was understanding and warm, expressing joy that Vivienne had found a place where she and Emma could heal. It was a crisp November day when Weston took Vivienne back to the river where they had first met. The water was low now, flowing peacefully between banks dotted with the last wildflowers of the season. They dismounted near the spot where he had pulled Emma from the flood, now transformed into a tranquil bend. "I wanted to show you something," Weston said, leading her to a large boulder overlooking the water. He pointed to a small sapling he had planted on the riverbank, protected by a circle of stones. "I put this here for Emma, and for my sister." A reminder that even after destruction, new life finds a way. Vivienne was deeply touched by the gesture, understanding all it represented. "It's beautiful," she said, leaning into his side as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "There's something else," Weston said, his voice slightly unsteady. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Vivienne's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "I'm not asking you to forget Thomas," Weston said earnestly, "or to rush into anything before your heart is ready, but I love you, Vivienne. I love Emma as if she were my own. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days showing you both that love." Tears spilled down Vivienne's cheeks as she looked from the ring to the man holding it, this quiet, steady cowboy who had literally dived into danger to save her child and had been saving them both in smaller ways every day since. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Weston Farley, I will marry you." Their wedding was held on Christmas Eve in the double Artiques main house, decorated with evergreen boughs and candles for the occasion. Clara Richardson, whose health had improved considerably with Vivienne's help, had insisted on making the wedding cake herself. Frank stood as Weston's best man, while Emma, now a toddling 15 months old, was carried down the makeshift aisle by one of the ranch hands, scattering rose petals from the ranch's hothouse with gleeful abandon. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with Vivienne wearing a new dress of deep blue velvet that Clara had helped her sew, and Weston looking uncommonly polished in a clean shirt and new vest. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Weston's kiss was tender and promising, the beginning of a lifetime together. Spring of 1877 brought new beginnings. Weston had saved enough to buy a small parcel of land adjacent to the Double R, where he built a sturdy 2-bedroom house with his own hands. Vivienne planted a garden, and Emma, now a chattering 2-year-old with her mother's copper curls, delighted in helping to water the seedlings. It was in that garden, on a warm May afternoon exactly 2 years after the flood that had brought them together, that Vivienne shared her news with Weston. "Emma is going to have a brother or sister," she told him, watching his face transform with joy. By Christmas, if the doctor's calculations are correct. Weston gathered her into his arms, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I never thought I'd have this, he confessed. A family of my own, a woman who loves me. After losing my sister, I closed myself off from wanting these things. The flood took so much from me, Vivienne said, resting her head against his chest. But it also gave me you. Sometimes I think about how many things had to align perfectly for us to find each other that day. If you hadn't been tracking those Mustangs, if the rain had stopped an hour earlier. I would have found you somehow, Weston said with quiet certainty. Some things are just meant to be. In December, as winter draped the Colorado mountains in white, Vivienne gave birth to a healthy boy they named Thomas Weston Farley, honoring both the past and the present. And as Weston held his son for the first time, Emma perched on his knee to peer at her new brother. He knew with absolute certainty that the day he dove into that river was the day his life truly began. 5 years later, with 3 children now filling their expanded home with laughter and occasional chaos, Weston and Vivienne returned once more to the river. The sapling he had planted had grown into a young tree, strong enough now to withstand the spring floods on its own. Emma, now 7 and aware of the story of her rescue, placed wildflowers at the base of the tree. "This is where our family started," she said with the simple wisdom of childhood, "when Papa saved me from the water." Vivienne slipped her hand into Weston's, watching their younger children Thomas and 3-year-old Clara playing safely on the grassy bank under the watchful eye of Weston's newest ranch hand. The flood swept away her baby until the cowboy dove into the river and brought them both out, Vivienne mused, echoing the way their story was now told around Copper Creek. But the story didn't end there, did it? Weston's arm tightened around her waist as he pressed a kiss to her temple. "No," he agreed, his voice rich with contentment. "That was just the beginning."